I grew up in a cult. Now I have to kill my best friend. What I am about to describe about my life and my current circumstances will beggar belief. That being said, you don't need to believe me to help. If it all seems too outlandish to justify your time, consider this post to be a hyper-specific thought experiment instead. Whatever allows you to put yourself in my position, because I have no one else to lean on for guidance. Let's start with this. I was born into a secret cult isolated from society somewhere in the West Virginian wilderness. Our leaders are the Red Vassals. They aim to eradicate humanity through the cultivation of an ancient preternatural tree, allowing nature to reclaim and regrow the world. The Vassals' words, not mine. Of course, they would live through that Armageddon because of their unyielding devotion to nature and its regrowth. Normal cult stuff, to my limited understanding. Again, if it helps, consider this all make-believe. I've always thought it was bullshit, unlike my peers. Don't know why they can gulp down the metaphorical Kool-Aid like it's water on a hot day, while I found myself vomiting it back out after a sip. I'm just skeptical down to my DNA, I suppose. I wasn't taught any skepticism from the Vassals, and I don't have parents in the traditional sense. None of us do. Two groups exist within our cult, Vassals and Gemini. The Gemini are further divided into two subgroups, Essence and Attendants, also known informally as Roots and Resins, respectively. The Vassals raise, educate, and then sacrifice you as Gemini. They teach the Resins that their only purpose is sacrifice. The Vassals keep the Roots blissfully unaware of their impending end. You would think it's better to be born a Root, but I think the cruelty of not knowing, only to have the rug pulled out from under you, is actually much worse. I still haven't had the heart to tell Grace the whole truth. Unfortunately, it's hard to tell if that's what I want for her, or if that's my attendant conditioning puppeting me from the shadows. Both groups live together at the reservation, our compound in the deep Appalachian woods. The Vassals inhabit a large church in the center, with many smaller cottages surrounding it. I don't think the Vassals built the church themselves, I think they just refurbished it. Based on some Google image comparisons, it looks like Christian architecture. I believe the people who founded the cult happened across this long-abandoned place of worship and selected it as HQ because of the oak tree sprouting from the top. Whoever built the church in the first place designed it around the tree itself, creating a narrow chute in the ceiling to accommodate its growth. On the inside, all you can see is the massive tree trunk erupting from behind the pulpit. From the outside, you can appreciate the canopy resting on the roof. I think the choice to build the church around the tree was originally just a pragmatic one, an efficient and elegant way to use the landscape. In comparison, the Red Vassals chose it because of the perceived symbolism. Young Gemini live in the church with the Vassals, with all the Essence and Attendants intermixed and coming to know each other. There's about 15 young ones living with the Vassals at any given time. At some point, around the age of 8, however, Gemini are coupled, one Essence for one Attendant, one Root for one Resin. They then move you out to a cottage, where you'll live together till your germination ceremony, i.e., the part where they sacrifice us to the earth. But I am getting ahead of myself. Moreover, looking at the road signs from the bus window, I am running out of time. Need to speed things up a bit. In the beginning, there was Father Ludwig and his 3 daughters. During his upbringing, he watched industrialization defile and destroy his birth land. When he could no longer watch, he moved his family out into the woods, where they would happen across the place that would become the reservation. They lived peacefully and simply for a time. But as he aged, Father Ludwig wondered what would become of his daughters when he died. He did not want them to stay and die on the reservation. ending his bloodline, but he did not want them to return to modern society either. He labored over this dilemma every night until exhaustion put him to sleep. His spiritual vision, on which this cult and my existence are based, altered everything. The vassals tell us Father Ludwig communed with the earth itself that night. In the vision, the earth told him they had been searching for someone with a pure spirit to serve as a conduit for nature's divinity, allowing the simultaneous extermination and rewriting of humanity. When asked if he was willing to be anointed as the land's avatar and the new father of humankind, he accepted and asked the earth what to do next. Yes, it is all batshit. Bear with me, it gets worse. So apparently he woke up the next day, found a specific plot of land, and had his daughters bury him there alive. Before the dirt completely covered his face, he instructed his children to return to his grave in 2 months. When they did, he proclaimed his daughters would find a small tree resembling a red maple. They would know it was his new form because they could feel pulsations when they placed their hands on the trunk, almost like a heartbeat. His daughters, the original red vassals, found Father Ludwig and his oaken heartbeat 2 months after they had buried him alive. Thus they followed his instructions on how to grow their cult and bring about the world's end. To do this, they would need to cultivate the land, which is where us Gemini come in. Now is a good time to mention that we are an exclusively female society. Any male children are taken away at birth, either killed out of sight of the colony or just left to succumb to the elements in the woods. It's unclear. All men, excluding Father Ludwig in his tree form, I guess, are without a womb. They cannot create and bear fruit like the earth, so they have no home in our cult. I think the next question most would have is, how do they propagate? Well, one of 3 ways if you believe the vassals. Vassals are responsible for all the births on the reservation, and your place in the society depends on the circumstances of your conception. If you are an attendant, someone from outside assisted with your conception. Obviously, the vassals need to leave the reservation for supplies regularly. When they do, some of them come back pregnant from one-night stands. If you are an essent, you were conceived from the sap of the tree that used to be Father Ludwig. God knows what that means, and I think this is absolute horseshit. I believe the vassals just decide arbitrarily who is an essent and who is an attendant. How do vassals make more vassals? Simple. They just replicate themselves in a budding ritual, of course. Sometimes a new young woman will just appear among their ranks, and reproduction by budding, an immaculate conception, is the only explanation we have ever been given. So like I mentioned before, essence and attendants are conjoined as Gemini right before puberty. From that point on, you are each other's only family. Outside of daily educational sessions, Gemini, who are coupled, are forbidden to talk to anyone else, excluding vassals, but only if they address you first. Codependency develops pretty much overnight. Once coupled, segregation of your education begins. Everything I detailed above is taught before segregation. From then on out, however, attendants learn one thing, essence learns something else entirely. Sharing of information, if discovered, is punishable by excommunication and death. Vassals teach the attendants the rest of our so-called glorious purpose. Throughout our adolescence, we take field trips with the vassals to a remote plot of land. From a distance, it just looks like a patch of red maples. They are all relatively uniform in size and appearance, excluding one in the center, which is significantly larger and taller. We are told that one is Father Ludwig. Still alive, still growing. The other red maples are buried essence, young women that we all used to know, also still alive, also still growing. If any attendants have never visited Father Ludwig before, the group will experience an additional spectacle that day. A vassal will be present at the forest perimeter and waiting for us to arrive with an honored guest, an outsider in handcuffs, naked as the day they were born, screaming and cursing at us. Since they're so close to Father Ludwig, they'll already look unwell, their faces purple and swollen with clotting blood. The attendants then watch as the outsider is dragged by their arms closer and closer to Father Ludwig. This is where the screaming starts to get to me. The helpless, confused outsider's arms and legs will become distended with fluid, doubling over the course of a few minutes. If you have good eyesight, you'll be able to see outlines of blood vessels appear, bloated and congested with coagulated plasma in practically every inch of their body. At a certain point, the screams will stop, and the vassals will drop the victim's arms and leave them to decompose where they now lay. Typically, they are still a quarter of a mile from Father Ludwig when they die. According to the vassals, Father Ludwig and the buried essence release a sort of pollen that is responsible for the outsider's horrific transformation. Upon inhalation, it rapidly clots human blood, causing complete solidification of the vasculature at a sufficiently high concentration. We are all immune, of course, as we are all descendants of Father Ludwig. His blood shields us. To my peers, that definitively proved everything they had been taught. But how easy would it be to poison an outsider right before we arrive and then drag them toward that patch of red maples while the poison is at maximum effect? Sure would look like something supernatural was taking place. As a point of clarification, the vassals don't plan on dragging everyone out to Father Ludwig one by one. That apocalypse would be a little inefficient. What we are told, however, is that the pollen travels on the wind to nearby outsider settlements as far as 30 miles away. The people in those settlements have a life expectancy half the national average. They die of all sorts of clots in the brain, in the lungs, in the heart, and no one understands why. The vassals attribute it to consistent, small doses of Father Ludwig. As the patch surrounding him grows, the radius that the pollen reaches grows too. They say it will take a few hundred years, but they are confident that they will win the war of attrition in time. Of course, they need our help to do that. So, on an attendant's 17th birthday, we will deliver ourselves and our essence to Father Ludwig. Not in a large group like the field trips, just a couple Gemini and one vassal. When we reach the patch of red maples, we will find an empty grave on the periphery, pre-dug before our arrival. Wordlessly, we are expected to incapacitate our essence, our only family, with physical violence. The accompanying vassal will assist in this. We will then tie the essence wrists and ankles, throw them into the grave, and bury them alive. At no point should we speak to our essence to explain. The only way they will germinate into a red maple, like Father Ludwig, is through desperate confusion and deep betrayal. It cracks their spirit open, allowing his roots to take hold within them. That's the entire premise. The only way the essence will grow and produce the deadly pollen, as told to Father Ludwig in his vision, is if someone subjects them to uncompromising, mind-shattering betrayal. They are seeds that need the right conditions to germinate, otherwise they remain dormant. The coldness of profound despair ripens their holy blood for communion. Once an ascent is broken and buried, Father Ludwig senses their vulnerability. In response, he pushes the ends of his roots through the soil and into their skin, providing the necessary oxygen to keep their tissue alive as well as catalyzing their metamorphosis. But they still need nutrients, of course, so after an essence is no longer visible in their grave, an attendant lies down on top of the disturbed earth. The vassal present buries us too. The essence will then grow into and through us, using our blood and tissue as fuel to project themselves towards the surface. Once they are through the topsoil, the sun does the rest in terms of nutrition. Essence are seeds, and we are their fertilizer. As I alluded to before, essence learn none of this. I suspect they aren't taught much of anything, other than they are special and that one day they will grow beyond the confines of the reserve, out into the world like so many essence before them. I don't think most of them even know there is a world beyond the reserve. That is only speculation, though. Attendants, on the other hand, are very much aware of the world beyond us. They give us a full and detailed education on the history of man-made genocides and atrocities. We may even use laptops during certain free times throughout the day. I think the vassals need us to believe that humanity is corrupted beyond repair, and that the state of the world is beyond saving. Otherwise, we might try to abscond with our essence to live a different life, with a different purpose. To me, allowing us to use the internet feels like they are saying, "What, you don't believe that everything has gone to shit? Okay then, spend a few hours on the internet, let me know what you think." It's a clever system, I'll give them that. They create dependency, which turns into love, and then they use that love to install guardrails that keep us in line. For example, there is a roll call every morning. If one part of a Gemini isn't present at the roll call, the other is killed on the spot. Thought it was a hollow threat till I saw it myself. It wasn't a quick death, and I would never allow Grace to be put through it. Leaving as a couple would be viable, except the vassals figured out a way around that too. Essence are fed an extremely high dose of sedatives every morning. If they go a day without the medication, the withdrawal is supposedly so intense that it fries their brain. So, to leave together, you would need to have the medication as well, and a lot of it, which is kept under lock and key. The vassals make it seem hopeless. Even if we were to get away, they said, our training would inevitably kick in. They told us we have no choice in delivering our essence to Father Ludwig. We could not reject our purpose even if we wanted to. Believing we could reject our purpose is a delusion and a cardinal sin that has no equal. But let's say you were still willing to escape, even if you got a few days' supply of the sedatives. Only the vassals know the routes back to civilization. Could we use the internet to contact the rest of the world for help? Sure, but no one would believe us, and again, we do not know where we are. Well, we used to have no idea, but explaining that discovery starts with what happened to Holly. Holly was the only other attendant I've ever known who didn't seem to buy into all of this at face value. She was a few years older than me. We weren't friends per se, but we were aware of each other's doubts. The biggest difference was our perspective. She was hell-bent on getting herself and her essence away from the reservation. As much as I love Grace, my essence, I fell victim to paralyzing apathy for a few years. In my mind, we had both been unlucky enough to have been born into this unwinnable situation orchestrated by a coven of murderous lunatics. But at least we'd get to die together, close to each other. I wasn't worried about Grace being reborn or mutated into a red maple tree. Not till Holly. So it's between classes one day, and Holly covertly slips a note into my hand. It says to sit down at a computer next to her and to listen to what she has to say, but to not look at her or raise suspicion. She tells me she spent some time getting close to one of the younger vassals, promising her unsavory reimbursement if she were to take her to visit Father Ludwig, just the two of them. Normally, they blindfold us en route to Father Ludwig, but Holly convinced the younger vassal to take her there without blindfolds. Her plan was to watch for some sign of civilization on the way, memorize whatever she could, and then Google the location upon her return. A distant water tower with a county name on it allowed her to make a reasonable guess of the reserve's location. But she got more than she bargained for. The young vassal was zealous and overexcitable, so when they arrived at the plot of land, she was dead set on showing Holly something. She took her to the most recently germinated plot of land, where a fledgling red maple had sprouted. The vassal asked Holly to wait a few yards away, and then out of nowhere, she took out a hand shovel from her satchel and started digging a small hole aside the tree. After waiting for almost an hour, the vassal waved Holly over, turned on a flashlight, handed it to her, and then directed her to point the light into the hole. I think the vassal assumed this was why Holly had requested to bring her to Father Ludwig in the first place, to see the vengeful benediction of nature in real time. Holly started gagging from the smell of decay before she could visualize what the vassal was trying to show her. She covered her nose with a hand and part of her shirt, and then could look inside, only to see a rotting human hand, pierced by at least 10 red-brown pulsating worms. At least, that is what she thought at first, because she could see them twitching and throbbing, but upon further inspection, they had a splintered wooden complexion, like roots. She stepped back in stunned horror, but the vassal then indicated that there was another, greater miracle she wanted Holly to observe. Reluctantly walking forward and placing her head closer to the hole, she saw it. Between the tendons and bone of the hand, an eye was looking back up at her. At first, she thought she was seeing things like it was an optical illusion created by fungus and dirt. After a few seconds of watching, however, the eye blinked, and after another few seconds, it blinked again and again. Apparently, it almost looked like it was tearing up, but Holly admits she may be superimposing her own feelings on the traumatic memory. Her story roused me from my fatalistic catatonia, and I stopped sleepwalking. I was reignited. The thought of Grace undergoing such abominable suffering genuinely frightened me. Now that we knew approximately where the reservation was, I hoped that there was something more than this for us in the cards. Holly then pulled me into the chair she was sitting in. Turning around, she began keeping watch. In a whisper, she asked me to review and quickly memorize the map she had pulled up on her computer. To make a longer story short, Holly and her essence were killed before they could even try to escape. The young vassal disclosed their clandestine expedition to her elders. It was not a quick death. A year later, Grace and I made it out of the woods in one piece using Holly's intel. In the months before our departure, I slowly pilfered the supplies we needed for self-sufficiency: food, water, medicine, a few $100s. And the night before we left, a backpack and a laptop. Originally, I had given up on the idea of escape after Holly's death. But as my 17th birthday approached, I found myself unable to cope with the idea of Grace existing in a state of perpetual undeath in the cold, hard ground, comforted only by the lecherous roots of Father Ludwig. It felt like a happy ending at first. We have been away from the reservation for 2 entire weeks. Grace didn't understand what was happening, but she trusted my judgment. When we hit a major highway and then a bus station with trips as far north as Maine, I thought it was all over. But now, I'm not so sure. We made it as far as Pennsylvania. After sleeping a night in a shitty motel, I bought us a bus ticket to Vermont the following morning. Grace and I snoozed most of the ride, but when I woke up, we had gone south, not north. I studied my ticket in disbelief, and it revealed our destination was the town closest to the reservation, the first bus station we arrived at a few days prior. The purple bus cleared its portly backslide. A coincidental mistake made by my exhausted mind, I thought. That rationalization soothed me, until the same coincidental mistake happened a second time. And now, a third. Each time, I was convinced I had purchased a different ticket, but each time it eventually became clear that I didn't. And now we are out of time. My so-called training kicked in. It seems my subconscious is doing everything possible to drag Grace back to West Virginia and Father Ludwig. I'm still not sure I believe it all. Everything I have to work with is secondhand experience. Finally, she says, even my subconscious overriding my free will could just be psychosocial conditioning and not a sign of an inescapable supernatural trajectory. But is it worth risking it? What if the clock ticks over into my birthday and I go from having partial control of my actions to zero control? If I kill Grace now, I can at least assure myself she won't be buried near Father Ludwig. But maybe this is something I just have to keep fighting, and ultimately, its hold over me will break. It would seem like a strange and unusual thing to want to keep alive. Killing Grace is still the safest bet, though. It wouldn't be violent or painful. An overdose of her medication could cause her to drift peacefully off to somewhere much better than this. It's the only option that will guarantee her safety from the vassals, and me, I suppose. I'm open to ideas, but I need them soon.